The first house that Sarah and I ever bought, in my opinion, was kind of a wonderland for little boys and for kids in general. I mean, we were on the flight path of a small airport, so they could look up and say, planes, planes. Yeah, that's a plane. And our house was on the edge of town in between two grain elevators. So they could see big old farm truck and tractors pulling gravity boxes. And because there's grain elevators there, we were 3 houses away from the railroad tracks. And how great that would be for kids to look at and see and point out and exclaim. And more than just that, here's a picture of the house. It had wraparound porches in the front and around the back. My father and I turned 150 wooden spindles to restore those porches to the original shape they would have been in. And the kids could just be on those porches, safe and kind of home, and watching all these things going on. And so Sarah made it the rule, probably because of all the trucks and tractors and trains around, that they could not go out on the sidewalk and away from the house unless someone was with them. So she was very surprised one day when she turned around and the boys were gone. They were about this age. They were not very big. And she found them very quickly on the sidewalk where they were not supposed to be. And she said, "Didn't I tell you that you could not go out on that sidewalk unless someone was with you?" And the older one said, "There was. Eric was with me," holding his hand like that. Which is not what she meant, and which had greatly caused her a fright. We find a similar thing happening with Jesus as he's young in our gospel for today. His mom and dad are scared and frantic. They're looking for him everywhere. But the boy Jesus thinks it's the most natural thing in the world for him to be doing what he's doing at that moment. And so we have different points of view. Not only the point of view of a child versus a parent, which was there too, but also a human and divine difference in point of view. And this story is so endearing because all of us relate to it if we're parents. We've had a similar experience somewhere along the way. And also because the story is told from the parent's point of view, which is closest to ours. A brief synopsis from the Bible. Now his parents went to Jerusalem. And when he was 12 years old, they went up. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, his parents did not know. They went a day's journey. They began to search. They did not find. They returned. They found. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, but they did not understand. See how it's all from the parents' point of view. To his parents, this was a very strange event. They didn't understand it. How could their son be there doing what he was doing, But his mother ponders all these things and treasures them in her heart, much like Sarah treasured that story, because I wasn't there. She told it to me. But in this case, it's more than just a cute story of how a child sees the world. It's also a reminder for her of just how very special this boy of hers was. Because 13 years before this, Mary had been given a message by an angel that their child was to be the Son of God. And this passage today is the only account we have of the life of Jesus in between when he was a baby and when he was a full-grown man. So why are there so few? I think probably because much of what happened in between was pretty normal. Things that would happen in any family. I mean, it says even after they found him there at the temple instructing the religious teachers, that he went home and was obedient to them. Probably normally was. And I think pretty much things happened as you might expect for the next 17 years until his baptism. And so during that time, his parents could almost forget the very special nature of this child as normal life was happening with this child in the midst of all their other kids. But on this day, something very special happens that would remind them that this child was far more, because he was doing what no normal kid would have been doing on this day. At that time in Israel, there were three main festivals that all Israelites were supposed to go to the temple in Jerusalem and celebrate. And during these three festivals, the rabbis or teachers who were on the Sanhedrin would customarily have a period or time of instruction that was open to the public, and they would talk about the festival, they would talk about Bible passages, they would talk about religious matters, and it's probably there that they find Jesus on this day, talking with them, explaining things to them. You might wonder, well, what passages would they have been talking about? I think we can have a very likely guess because it's the Passover. So they're probably talking about the Passover, passages related to that, and then also how the Passover sacrifice gets fulfilled in the coming Messiah, which is something that Jesus knew very much about. Years later, on the road to Emmaus, he would school two disciples in how all the Bible and all the prophecies pointed to him. And he's probably doing something very similar on this occasion with those religious teachers. And so, even though he's 12. And so the Bible shows us both sides of Jesus. There's true God and true man, or boy. There is the normal kid side, which is kind of seemingly oblivious to his parents who are worried about where he is. And there's, because every parent has a story of a kid who's lost. But there's also then the Son of God style of how he is living as God himself put into a rather normal family. Not exactly a typical family, though. I mean, God had derailed the plans of Mary and Joseph in a big way even before Jesus was born. Joseph had in mind to build up a quiet, nice practice in carpentry in his hometown in Nazareth. That was his plan. And then Mary, her big thing on her agenda was the upcoming wedding to this wonderful man, until God upends their plans with a flight to Bethlehem and with the exotic rulers from the Far East coming to visit and running away from assassins sent by a maniacal king and into a foreign land to live for a while, totally upsets everything in their life as they become the parents of the Savior, God's Son in the flesh. We know what it's like when God disrupts our plans. Probably not so drastically as with Mary and Joseph, but he does. I remember a devotion where it was based on the psalm that said, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The one enthroned in heaven laughs." And the devotional writer asked the question, how do you make God laugh? And answered it by saying, you tell him your plans. Tell him what you're going to do in life because he's probably going to change them. We may not be in the same position as Mary and Joseph as parents of the Messiah, but we have all been in their place in terms of events in life that have been totally beyond our control, coming along and changing where we thought our life was going to go. And how do we react when that happens? When the car accident happens, or a child gives you unexpected news, or you have to switch jobs or move, or other circumstances in life out of your control swirl around and carry you with them, how do you handle it? What do you do? I think our passage for today gives us three things to remember when such events happen. And the first is to remember that very often God is trying to get our attention. I'm guessing that's what was going on with Mary and Joseph. I mean, it had been 13 years since that angel had visited, and much of what happened in between was what happens in most families. And you can forget a lot in 12 years when life is busy. I mean, we hear the story and we think, well, why did it take 3 days for them to find him in the temple? This is Jesus. Where did you think he would be? But we know how the story goes, and we know what happens later in Jesus' life. For them, they were just frantically looking for a 12-year-old lost in the biggest city, crowded with people. Anything could have happened to him. And besides, it had been a while since the angel visit. We know that Jesus comes to lay down his perfect life for the sins of the world, that all who believe in him would be saved, and that's his mission. My guess is that Mary and Joseph kind of were caught up in normal life most of the time. And right now we're just trying to find him. But this day was a big reminder, especially when they find him. And Jesus says to them, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Which he says with Joseph standing right there. And Joseph and Mary's house was in Nazareth. How does God get our attention? Last week I had a funeral for someone who was about my age. Don't you hate it when you see that happens, you know? And 2 months ago, this person was not sick. 2 months ago, they didn't think that they'd be going to a funeral for this person. That's one way God shakes us up and says, hey, recognize there's a plan here. There's more to life. But there are many ways where God can try to get our attention. Whenever life takes a sudden detour, or wherever we think that, hey, this isn't what I was planning, just remember, maybe God's trying to get our attention, getting us to reorganize where we are in life, or where we are in relation to him, trying to draw us back to him. Because we need reminders that we are not really ever in control, but that God is there and that he has a plan for us. And then we need to remember that God's plan is bigger and better. We heard that second reading today in the epistle from Ephesians, where it said, God chose us in Jesus before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. That's God's plan, that we would follow him and be holy and blameless as followers of him. And for some people, that doesn't sound like the best of plan. Doesn't sound like something they want to sign up for. Because if their life is wholly belonging to God that way, maybe they think they won't be as happy. Maybe they think they won't have as much freedom. But does that really make sense? Imagine if a child comes to a parent and that child says, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry for the way I've been treating you, how thoughtless I've been. I'm ready to change, though. From this point on, I'm going to try hard. I'm going to be the child you want me to be. Would a parent at that point say, I'm glad you said that, because now I can really make your life miserable? No. What makes sense? What would God say? He would probably say, I am so glad you said that, because now I can bless you in ways that I couldn't before. Now I can get you to see your purpose in life and why I made you and why you are the way you are. Now I can show you the significance of living for something way beyond yourself. Now I can show you what I can do through you. Now I can give you the satisfaction of a life that is in my plan for you. Now I can show you a joy of living in grace and in grace toward others. I'm glad you said that, because now I can bless you like I couldn't before. Notice, though, that when God says he's got a bigger, better plan, that does not necessarily mean it's an easier plan. Mary and Joseph probably would not have chosen the way their first child was born, with the donkey breath and the musty straw and hay and probably mice scurrying around there. They probably would have chosen something far different than wrapping a child in swaddling clothes and laying him in a manger. The swaddling clothes Mary would have brought along because she knew what was coming, but the manger, I'm guessing that was just a practicality, because you wouldn't have wanted to lay a baby on that floor. And besides, he might have gotten stepped on by an animal or bitten by a rat. So put him in a manger. It's at least a little bit better, you know. But in this process, don't you think that Mary or Joseph would have looked up to heaven at some point and said, no room in the inn? Really, God? Is this your plan? After we today of all days, after we travel all this way, this is what you wanted to happen, really? And do you ever look at God and say, okay, God, if you are God, my God, and you are almighty, why is my life so hard right now? If God is your God, and he wants the best for you, and your life is hard, stands to reason that there's probably something more important than your comfort. And it's probably your soul, it's probably your spiritual life, it's probably your faith. I know me. If life is easy, maybe I don't really try so hard. when I was in grade school, I went to a very small Lutheran school, and everybody had to be on the sports team so that you could have a team, even if you weren't very good. And so I was on the basketball team, and I am not a basketball player. And so one day, we had this big tournament, and they divided us up between schools and formed different teams. And my teammates said to me, Greg, don't dribble. You run down the court, and if we pass it to you, you pass it to somebody else. I could dribble. It's just that every time I did, the other team stole the ball. So they said, don't dribble. Now, imagine you're a good basketball player, and you are on a great basketball team, and you are playing a team of Gregs. You'd win every time. You wouldn't even have to try. Would you like it? Maybe at first. Season would get kind of boring. Would you become a better basketball player? No, you would not. And so if life were always easy, a whole lot of people would take the path of least resistance spiritually. They wouldn't develop much of a prayer life or a devotional life or stretch their spiritual gifts. They wouldn't know God very well. They'd know about God, but they would not know the God who was there for them when they cried out for him because it was too much for them, or when he saw them through the time that was so hard. Today, this goes for us, and I think it also goes for churches. Today, I get the privilege of being installed as senior pastor here. And you know, last couple years haven't always been very easy for this church. But I have to believe that this is part of God's plan for me, for the church, so that we could be in the place where we are now. So when God messes up our life, we remember that God is often trying to get our attention, and that he's got a plan, and it's bigger and better than ours. And we also need to remember to trust him. After Jesus talks to his parents, it's when he said, I had to be in my Father's house, it says they didn't understand really what he was saying, but Mary treasured these things, pondered them, stored them up in her heart. And I'm sure that they said, well, this has got to be part of God's plan. This is no ordinary kid here, and we just have to trust God on this one. And when God messes up our plans, it's almost always a test. You know, are you going to trust me or not in this? And one thing I know, you're not here by accident. Remember that reading we just had? Before the foundation of the world, God predestined you to believe in him. I think he knew you'd be sitting here in this church here today at this time. And he wants you to know that he truly loves you. And that he's forgiven you in Christ. And that he made you for a purpose. And that you matter to him. He's seen every heartbeat of yours. He knows everything you've ever done. And he loves you anyway. And it's not because of your good performance record. It's because he made you to be his. And then he bought you back at the price of the cross. Yeah, sometimes he messes up our plans and our ideas. But from all that God has been, from the beginning of the world until now, he's letting us know that we can trust him. Amen.